Welcome to Design Studio Training. What you can see up on the screen right now is our Design Studio software, and this is the way it's going to look when you first install it. Before we begin the actual training though, I want to make some changes to the way the layout looks. For example, you'll notice down at the bottom left corner we have an InView and an SDA, and on the right hand side we've got a couple tabs. This is not ideal for using the software, so before we start training, I want to rearrange the way the screen looks. To do that, I'm going to go to View and Docking Panes, and I'm going to choose the Reset Docking Panes to Advanced Layout. What this is going to do is it's going to bring a bunch of tabs to the bottom of the screen, as well as some additional tabs on the left-hand side. The next step before we start is I want to remove some of the tabs on the left-hand side and bring some of those other tabs down to the bottom so that they're all in one place. So for example, the font tab on the left, I'm going to undock it and move it to the bottom. To undock it, I just click on the thumbtack at the top right, and that undocks it from the left. I could then just drag it downward until it docks with everything else. For plugins, I'm going to close that out completely, and I'm going to do the same thing for border styles. And then lastly, we have Toolbox. I'm also going to undock that and bring that to the bottom as well. So now I have all the tabs that I need in one single location. The next thing that I want to do is I want to put the tabs at the bottom in a working order. And what I like to do is I want to put all the simple tabs on the far left hand side, and as we move toward the right, things get more complex. So for example, I'm going to bring players to the far right, and I'm going to bring graphics to the far left. And I'll further explain this once we have them all in the right order. It's just a matter of dragging the tabs across the bottom until you get them in the order that you like. Once they are in the order, we can go back up to View, Docking Panes, and you could choose Save Current Docking Pane Layout. And what this will do is, anytime these tabs get out of order, you can always restore them by going back up to View, Docking Panes, and Load Last Save Docking Pane Layout. The concept here is simple. The tabs are in order from left to right, simple to complex. So if you look at the bottom left corner, we've got graphics, fonts, videos, and sounds, and that leads us to messages, and then on to categories, channels, toolbox, layouts, and last but not least, the Players tab. This also creates a workflow which we'll go through right now. I'm going to start at the far right hand side under Players. Your Players tab is going to contain all of your actual players. This will be your InViews as well as your SDAs. So whether it's virtual or an actual piece of hardware, all of your players are going to be located here. So in my example here, I've got one InView and I've got one SDA, and they both act the same way. So if you learn how to do one of them, you pretty much know how to do the other. Let's just start off with the SDA. So first off, the way this works is pretty simple. You double click on the player, and that opens up the player's playlist. So whatever you see in this gray area up at the top is what's going to play on that particular device. In this case, the SDA has something called a custom layout. And when I move my mouse over it, you can kind of get a glimpse to what that layout looks like. The better way to visually see your layout is to right click on your player down at the bottom and choose Preview. What this is going to do is it's going to open up a new preview window and play exactly what is scheduled on your player. So in this case, we're going to see what that custom layout looks like. In this case, we've got a layout that has some call center data. So the left hand side in the main screen, we've got the call data. We've got two boxes on the right hand side for different types of content, and we've got a news ticker across the bottom. Now that I've saved my changes, your player is going to update with your new changes. In this case, I've removed everything from the playlist, and so now my preview is empty. So this matches up. Empty playlist, empty content. What I want to do next is I want to slowly build upon that content to show you how this works. Going back to Design Studio, let's start off with the graphic tab. The graphic tab contains all of your graphics. This is going to include any graphics that come with the system, as well as any graphics that you import yourself. So for example, we provide you with backgrounds, banners, and icons. And if we go into any one of these folders, you will see we've got icons. Very simply, you take the graphic that you want and you drag it up to the SDA playlist. Whatever you drag to the playlist is what's going to play on the screen. So in this example, I've got an apple, bacon and eggs platter, and banana. So if I were to save the changes, the screens would immediately update and play those three items in the order in which I have them. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to click on the Save shortcut in the top left, and I'm going to bring back up the preview screen. And you'll see very quickly the preview screen updates. There's our apple, followed by our bacon and eggs platter, and then last but not least, our banana. Let's go back to the playlist. So in addition to the graphics that you see here, you also have the ability to import your own graphics. And the way this is done is pretty simple. You just right click at the bottom and you choose Add Graphics. That's going to let you browse your computer or network drives for any graphic files. I have several examples here, and the nice thing is you could select one or multiples at a time. So in this case, if I want to select them all, I can highlight every graphic, click on Open, and in the graphics come. And there they are. So just like with the apple, bacon, and banana, I can drag my new graphics to the playlist as well. Again, anytime you want to push those changes out to your SDA, just save those changes, and out they go. So now we have a playlist of multiple graphics, and before we go any further, I just want to point out some of the properties. The first thing that you may notice is each one of the items in the playlist has a green bar. That green bar is just simply an indication that those items are always scheduled. So from now until infinity, each one of these items are scheduled 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We do have the ability to change that, but we're going to take a look at that later. The other property I wanted to look at was the timeout. If you click on any one of these items in the playlist, you'll notice a set of properties on the left-hand side. And there's a property called timeout, which is defaulted for 10 seconds. Each one of these graphics has that default property for 10 seconds. So you're going to see each one 10 seconds at a time as it goes down the playlist. When it gets to the bottom of the playlist, it just simply starts back at the top again. The other property I want to quickly take a look at is transition. That too has a default property, and that is crossfade. So as it goes from one item to the next, it just simply does a crossfade transition. And there's several other transition types we can take a look at in a little bit. What I also want to take a look at is the different graphic formats that we can import. So if we go back down to the bottom and I were to right click, add graphics, that's going to bring up the browsing window, and you'll see in the bottom right corner the different formats that we can import. So what we can bring in is bitmaps, GIFs, PNGs, JPEG, and XAML. So anything like a Word document or PowerPoint or PDF, those are not compatible. You have to first save them as a graphic before you can import them. When we first looked at the preview, we had that layout in place where we had the different sections of the screen divided out. We've taken that away, so right now everything would be playing full screen. We don't have that division just yet. That will actually be a few steps ahead. So we've taken a look at the graphic tab at the bottom left corner. Now let's move on and take a look at the font tab. Right next to the graphics is fonts, and basically these are the fonts that you can use. And just like with the graphics, we can also import our own fonts. To do that, we just right click at the bottom, add fonts, and that's going to let us browse our PC for any font files. So if I want to pick a few of these fonts, I'm going to highlight them, click on open. We do get prompted to make sure that we do have the legal rights to use those fonts. I'm going to click OK to those. And just like with the graphics, they get imported, and there they are. We'll take a look at fonts in a few more steps, but for now, let's move on to the video tab. The video tab is where we can import videos, just like with graphics and fonts, and it works the same way. Just right-click your mouse, add videos, and this is going to let you browse, again, your PC for any video files. I'm going to just import one of those for now. And in it comes. Once it's imported, I can then drag it to the playlist, just like I did with the graphics. One thing to note, though, is the timeout property for videos is set to never. We don't have to worry about setting a timeout for videos because videos are going to play for their entire duration. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move that graphic to the very top of the playlist, so that's the first thing that plays. When I go to save changes and we look at that preview one more time, the preview is going to restart, and the first thing we'll see is the color swirl video. And there it is. The nice thing with videos and even with graphics is you can play them multiple times in a playlist. For example, if I wanted that color swirl video to play multiple times, I just have to drag it up to the playlist multiple times. So in this case, I could actually have it play in between each graphic. There's also a property on the left-hand side called maintain aspect ratio, and that is checked by default. So videos are not going to stretch to fill out the entire screen. If I uncheck that, it will. Let's take a look at the different formats that we can import. Again, right-clicking at the bottom, add videos. Down in the bottom right corner, we can see the different video formats, and they're listed right here. So that's pretty much it for videos, pretty straightforward. The next tab over is the sound tab. And again, just like with graphics, fonts, and videos, you can also import your own sounds. As you can see here, we have several different sound types, but we can also add more by right-clicking, add sounds, and that will let us browse our PC again for any sound files. I've got two samples here of exploding glass. I'll go ahead and import those, and in they come. Just like with fonts, I can't drag and drop these sound files onto the playlist. They first need to be associated with something. We're going to take a look at that here very shortly. So we've taken a look at the graphics, the fonts, the videos, and the sounds, and that leads us to our next tab, messages. Messages are really the combination of those previous four tabs. If we go to the messages tab, and we're going to go into the sample folder here called marketing communications. These are what messages are. They're very similar to PowerPoint slides. So you can see here we've got some examples, and if I double click on the meeting message, you'll see here we've got a blue background, we've got a graphic in a box on the left, we've got another box for the body of our text, and finally one here for the title. These are really the ingredients to messages. If I go back to the SDA playlist, just like everything else we've seen before, we can take these items and drag them up to the playlist. So now, in addition to playing graphics and videos, we can also schedule messages on an SDA playlist. Again, these items would play full screen on your TV. We're going to spend some time in a little bit playing around with messages and creating new messages, but for now, let's move on to the next tab, which is categories. Categories is just a way to group like content together. I've got three examples: advertisements, human resources, and marketing communications. So our playlist right now is getting pretty long. We've got lots of different types of content in there in no particular order. The idea with categories is we can bring up like content together at once. For example, if I've got a category that contains all my human resources content, I can take that category and drag it to the playlist. And now everything in that category is now scheduled to play. Ideally, we want to use something like categories to keep things organized. In this case, I'm going to remove all of this other stuff that I've added to the playlist, and instead I'm going to have human resources, advertisements, and marketing communications. And what this does is it makes life a lot easier in terms of scheduling. I know that this SDA is going to play the human resources content, followed by advertisements, and then lastly, marketing communications. At any point when I need to manage what's in those categories, you just go to the bottom, double click on the category, and that opens up the category. In this case, there's nothing scheduled in here. But if I were to go to the message tab, I can take a message, drag it into the category. I could take another message and another, and so on and so forth. And you'll see that it shows us the thumbnails of each of the messages as well as the order in which it plays. It doesn't just have to be messages either. I can go to the video tab and I could play videos in a category. I can also go to the graphic tab and play graphics. So the idea here is categories can organize your content. Let's look back at the SDA playlist. So thinking back to the way we had it before, where we had a long list of content, instead we now have just 3 items in our playlist. And now all we need to do is manage the content through those 3 categories. So now if I have a message for human resources, I'd go to the category tab, I'd double click to open up human resources, and I would drag and drop my content into this category. If I have an advertisement, I would double click on advertisements, drag and drop content in there. So it makes things much easier to manage. So let's take a quick look at the categories in the playlist. So first off, we have human resources. Again, property window on the left-hand side. We do have a timeout property, but it is grayed out. Instead of the timeout property for categories, we use something called items per cycle. And this dictates how many items you see from a particular category before it moves down the playlist. And the default is 3. So what you get are 3 items from human resources, and then it moves down to advertisements. You get 3 items from that. And then lastly, marketing communications, again 3 items. Then it's going to go back to the top of the list again to human resources, and now it's going to play the next 3 items, and so on and so forth. So you're able to control how much of a particular category you see at a time. That number can be changed anywhere, including all, which means it's going to play everything from that category before it moves down the playlist. So that's an overview of categories. We'll take a look at that more later, but let's move on to the next tab called channels. Channels and categories are very similar. In fact, we recommend that you use one or the other, but you really don't need to use both. To illustrate how categories and channels are similar, I've created 3 channels with the same exact names as the categories. So you can see here, they somewhat serve the same purpose. I can drag each one of those channels to the playlist, and just like with categories, it's going to bring up everything within that channel. Now there are a couple of differences between the two. First off, when we look back at categories, the category has the property called items per cycle, which you can dictate how many items you see at a time. With channels, you don't have the items per cycle. You also don't have the timeout. Channels are going to play until they are complete. So whether you have 5 slides or 500 slides, it's not going to matter. It's going to play everything from that channel before moving down the playlist. The other difference is categories can play graphics, videos, and messages. And channels can also do graphics, videos, and messages. But channels can also play categories. And channels can also play other channels. So there's a lot more options to embed content within a channel as opposed to categories. So it's really your pick on which one you prefer. But the rule of thumb is use one or the other, but not both. Okay, moving right along to the Toolbox tab. The Toolbox tab contains other types of content we can play. Starting at the top, we have subscription categories. These are the categories that come from RMG Networks. So this is the on-target content. If you subscribe to this content, these are the different categories that you receive. And it's just a matter of dragging and dropping those categories to the playlist. So for example, I'm going to take our SDA and I'm going to do a Control-A and remove all of the content. I'm going to go down to the subscription categories and I'm going to drag business news, entertainment news. I'll scroll down a little bit further to weather and I'll grab local forecast. So I've added these 3 categories to the playlist. I'm going to save the changes by right-clicking on the tab and choosing Save. And let's pull up our preview one more time. So in a few seconds here, the preview will restart, and we're now seeing the subscription content that's coming through. This is going to happen automatically once you set up your subscription code. When it gets to the weather is going to play based on the zip code assigned to that SDA. so you don't have to do any additional configurations to get the correct weather. Below subscription categories, we have dynamic categories. And dynamic categories are used with Design Studio Lite. So Design Studio Lite is a web-based version of Design Studio where an end user can go in and contribute content, but they can only contribute content to any of these dynamic categories. So if we had a Design Studio Lite user in this case, we would want to take one of their categories and drag that to the playlist. So in this example, if I put the Design Studio Lite category in the playlist, somebody with Design Studio Lite access can then go in and add content to that one category. Below that, we have screen control commands. This is an additional product that lets you control when the TVs turn on and turn off. You can also change the volume and change the input on the TVs. Just to note, this does require additional hardware, so this will not work unless you make that purchase. And then last but not least, we have other content. Other content is going to let you play things like a web page, a video feed, or streaming video. Just like anything we've seen before, it's just a matter of dragging and dropping. So if I take the web URL from down below, I can drag and drop that onto the playlist. In the property window on the left-hand side, if I scroll down, there is a place for a URL. And all I need to do is type in a website address. And now the SDA will actually go out to the internet and pull that page in. So with that said, the SDA would require internet access for this to work. Below web URL, under the toolbox, we also have video feed. Many of our SDAs are equipped with a TV tuner card, so we can drag video feed up to the playlist, and then again, using the property window on the left-hand side, we can select the channel that we want it to play. Lastly, we have video stream. So if you have a media server, we can also pull this to the playlist, and again, using the properties on the left-hand side, we can put in the address of that video stream. And that is the toolbox. So everything we've done up to this point would be playing full screen. So if we look back at the preview window, you'll see that we have one message or piece of content at a time. And that takes us to our next tab, the Layout tab. The Layout tab is what you use to divide the screen into different sections. So really, everything that we've done up to this point is full screen, and it's not typical of what you see with customer implementations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everything that we have in the playlist, do a Control A, and remove it. And now under the Layout tab, I've got two layouts. I've got a sample layout and a custom layout. Let's take a look at a sample layout that was pulled from templates. If I double click on that layout, you'll see that this divides your screen into three different sections. You have a main area, a top right area, and a bottom right area. Any layout that you have, you can also make changes to. So for example, if I want this bottom right area to be smaller, I could certainly shrink that down like so. Okay. Let's go back to our SDA playlist. I'm going to take our sample layout and I'm going to drag it into the playlist, and I'm going to save the changes, and I'm going to bring back the preview. So the preview has restarted, but we don't see anything yet. And that's because we haven't put any content into our layout. So let's go back to that sample layout, which I have open still. I'm going to resize this back to the way it was. The way this works is also pretty simple. You double click on the area of your layout, and now each area of the layout has its own playlist. So now in the main area, I can go back down to the Toolbox tab, and I could locate subscription categories. And in this example, I'm going to take weather slide. So weather, current conditions, local forecast, national weather, and regional radar. And so now the main area of my screen will play just those four categories. If I click back on the layout tab at the bottom here, I could then go back, and now I'm going to select the bottom right. And in the bottom right, I'm just going to go to the video tab, and I'm going to play that color swirl video. And then last but not least, we have the top right. I'll go up there. And now here's where categories come into play. I'm going to go to the category tab, and I'm going to say the top right of this layout is going to play human resources, advertisements, and marketing communications. And we'll take a look at why we would do that and how that makes life easier. Okay, so I'm going to save the changes of our layout. So again, anytime you see an asterisk next to something at the top, We want to save that. Let's go back to our preview. So what you'll see now is as the preview loads, we have now placed content into each section of the screen. Okay, so let's take a look back at the Layout tab and let's look at the custom layout. I'm going to go ahead and double click to open that up. Custom layouts are done by our media designers, and they're a little bit more complex than the templates that you'd find in Design Studio. In this case, you'll see that this one has a main area, a top right, a bottom right as well, but it also has a ticker and a header message. You'll also notice it has this green color box behind everything, so you can actually layer different areas of the layout. I'm going to go back to our SDA playlist, and I'm going to drag a custom layout here as well. So you'll notice here that I've got two different layouts scheduled, which you can do. We have the sample layout first, and then the custom layout second. If we look at the timeout property on the left-hand side, you'll see that the timeout is set to never, which means it's never going to time out of this particular item. So in this case, we're never going to actually see that second item in the playlist because it's going to get stuck on the first one because the timeout is set to never. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that sample layout, and now let's go ahead and save the changes of the SDA so we can see what the custom layout looks like. So I'm going to pull the preview up and we'll see it restart here shortly. And this is an example of a media kit. So you'll see it's a little bit more involved than the sample one that we looked at first. It's got the crawling ticker across the bottom. It has a header at the top. It's got an area for the date and time in the top right. And it's got two divided boxes on the right hand side for smaller content. So let's take a look at that layout and see how it's broken down. I'm going to go back to the custom layout tab at the top. And now let's take a quick look at each one of the areas. We'll start off with the main area. So I'm going to double click on that. And you'll see we have a list of different data messages. And so in this example, this is for a call center that has different call center groups, and it's just going to cycle through these messages to display different call center stats. If we go back to the main area, let's take a look at the top right. Top right has three categories: human resources, marketing, and local forecast. And we'll take a look at the bottom right. This one is all 100% on target content. So you've got business news, health and safety, info briefs, current conditions, and sports news. And we'll take a look at the ticker next. Ticker, we've got one message. So it's going to play that ticker message all the time. So it's going to be in constant rotation across the bottom of the screen. And we also have the header at the top. The header is just a single message. If I take a quick look at that by opening it up, you'll see it's got a place for customer name here. If I pull that preview back up, you'll notice that that's where it sits. So no matter what changes down below it, the screen is always going to have the customer name across the top. Okay, let's close that out and let's look at the one last area. It's that green box behind it all. So that is just a message that holds the date and time. Let's go ahead and open that one up and take a look. It's a very large message. So what I'm going to do up at the top is I'm going to zoom out to 33%. And you'll see this is what goes on in the background of the entire layout. And so everything else sits on top of this. Any change we make here would then affect the way the screen looks. So again, let's pull that preview back up and you'll see there's that orange mustard colored background on the left. We've got the two boxes with a blue and white background on the right. And that's what we see here on the layout. So for example, if I were to click on this box here and drag it off the screen, okay, I've removed that yellow mustard color background. If I were to do something called publish this, which we'll get into shortly, that pushes the changes out to the screen. And so now without that background, if we go back to that preview, what we'll notice now is that orange background is now gone. And now we have black space. Okay. So that's how that works. Again, if I put it back and I were to republish this, we'll go back to the preview and it's back. Okay. So using one of these backgrounds is a really nice way to customize your layout. So now that we've looked at the Layout tab, that takes us to our next and final tab, Players. The Players tab, as mentioned earlier, is where you're going to find all of your devices. And so right here we've got InView and SDA, and those use the layouts. So if we look at the tabs across the bottom, we've come all the way across from left to right, starting with graphics, fonts, videos, and sounds, which are used to create messages. Your messages can go into categories or channels. Categories, channels, and toolbox items would play in a layout, and finally your layout would play in your player. And so that's generally how it works. This concludes our overview training of Design Studio. So take a look at part 2, where we cover messages. Thank you for watching.